Today we have Dr. Arlener Turner, who has graciously, decided to give the presentation. Although we're sad that Dr. Osario couldn't be in attendance today, we're very gracious to have Dr. Turner, and Dr. Turner is a research neuropsychologist and assistant professor here at NYU. Dr. Turner's background and expertise is in Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline and cognitive dysfunction related to depressive disorders. She received her doctorate in neuropsychology from Howard University in Washington, D.C., and her primary research interest is in the impact of sleep disturbance on cognitive functioning. So, Dr. Turner, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you for that great introduction. So I'm going to just go ahead and share the presentation so we can get started talking about sleep and brain health. So I'll start with this quote here. If sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it is the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made. And this quote comes from the fact that everyone and everything sleeps. And this is in the situations of animals who tend to have a lot of predators out there looking for them while they're sleeping, and they still do it, right? So the thing is that sleep is still really largely a mystery as to why it is fully necessary, although we have figured out a few things. So we'll talk about a few of the things that we have figured out. So first, housekeeping, I'm going to talk about just tiny bit of physics here, and I put the cute sleeping animals just to soften the blow of the fact that this is physics information. But want to talk about sound waves or waves and the amplitude and frequency of what we're seeing. So amplitude really just talks about kind of the height of the wave, while frequency talks about the amount of the wave you get in how many times to have the wave in a certain amount of time. And so the reason why I want to talk about this is because when we look at sleep in the lab and different places like that, they're looking at brain waves and they're looking at the amplitude and frequency of those brain waves to tell which parts of sleep you're in. And so this will be important to a lot of the different things we're discussing. So over to the right there, you can see the low frequency to high frequency, and then the amplitude changes as well. So this will kind of come back up. So I just wanted to bring this in so we can see that. So what is sleep? Sleep really used to be considered this passive condition like a coma, and we didn't really know what was happening there. But now, and eventually we really figured out that it's an active and cyclic process. So there's a cycle between two very different states, non-rapid eye movement sleep and rapid eye movement sleep. So non-rapid eye movement sleep generally tends to play this somatic vegetative maintenance role. So this is when the things that you don't think about happen, the things that you don't have to participate in, like growth hormones tend to peak during these deep times of sleep. Rem sleep or rapid eye movement sleep is what most people think of when you say sleep. It's when your eyes are moving behind the lids and when we tend to dream, and it plays a role in different brain processes that that deal with the flow and structure and storage of information. So as I talked about those different kind of stages that they occur in, the cycle is repeated several times during the night. So what we have here, and hopefully you can see my cursor, is a hypnogram that sleep technicians generally use to describe the sleep and to look at sleep in individuals. So you have the different stages that that I just talked about here across the board. So you have awake, REM sleep, and then the non-REM sleep stages 1 through 4. And so you can see the different lines of where they are in the sleep. So, and then this is the EEG type of information where we measure the sleep. And this is where the amplitude and frequency that we were discussing come into play as well, because the different stages of sleep have different amplitudes and frequencies of brainwaves at that time. So the restfulness of your sleep actually depends on the amount and the continuity of your sleep. So the ability to stay asleep for a certain amount of time and whether or not you are awakened. And that doesn't mean that you fully wake up and you notice it. Sometimes we wake and don't know that we have awakened because of the different changes in the brain waves. But this is things that change kind of throughout life, and we'll come back to that a bit. So during sleep, we experience the two different states. And then I want to talk a little bit about the stages specifically now. So for the stage 1, that is the beginning of the process. So this is the link between being awake and falling asleep. Stage 2 actually marks the onset of sleep, like when you become like disengaged from your environment and things like that. Your breathing and your heart rate and your regular body temperature tends to start to go down at this point. And we spend about half of our sleep cycle in those first 2 stages. So stage 1 is that lighter sleep where it's really easy to wake you up. Stages 3 and 4 are the deepest states of sleep and when we experience the most restorative types of sleep. So it's essential to our functioning. Our muscles are completely relaxed, our blood pressure drops, our breathing is slower. And during these deep stages, the blood supply to the muscles is increased and energy is restored. And that it helps with tissue growth, repair, and things like that. And important hormones are released during this time as well. So the rapid eye movement sleep, or REM, actually occurs increasingly over the later part of the night and is necessary for providing energy to our brains. During the REM sleep, our brains are active, and that's when the dreaming happens. And our bodies actually tend to become paralyzed or immobile during sleep. And the muscles shut down again, and so we're still relaxed, and that's hopefully you're not acting out your dreams. Your breathing and your heart rate may be a little bit irregular, and this is when there's much more active brain activity, and that's where the darting of the eyes back and forth under the eyelids are seen. So, and that's of course where the stage of sleep gets its name. So REM is actually really important because it may contribute to the consolidation of memories. And so when you are having like some learning experience, things like that, REM sleep is very important, and it comprises about 1/4 of our night. So overall, we cycle through REM sleep and the 4 stages of non-REM sleep each night, and each cycle takes about 90 to 120 minutes. And there are approximately 6 to 7 non-REM cycles per night. And again, like the non-REM takes up about 75% of the night, while REM takes up about 25% of the night. So with that here, this is really just kind of a bit of a better overview of the time we spend in each of the stages per night. So stage 1 is about 4 to 5% of the night, and it's the light sleep we talked about. And so there will be occasional muscle twitches during the stage 1, but again, that's where it's really easy to wake up. Stage 2, about 45 to 50% of the night, and your breathing pattern changes a lot. Then there's also a slight decrease in your body temperature. Stage 3, 4 to 6%, stage 4, 12 to 15%, and then stage 5, which is what they've labeled REM sleep, is the 20 to 25% of the night. So of course, sleep need varies by age. This is something we all kind of know, right? Everyone says sleep like a baby, and it's no wonder. I mean, look how peaceful he looks, right? So newborn infants, newborns and infants from about 0 to 2 months, they spend about 10 and a half to 18 hours of sleep. 2 to 12 months, they spend 14 to 15 hours of sleep, or at least they should. And the same with toddlers and children, right? 13 to 15 hours, moving into 12 to 14. So the hours of sleep that we kind of tend to need decreases as we age. Until we get to adults and older persons who sleep on average or should sleep on average about 7 to 9 hours per night. And so this graph really just shows that gives a better idea of that table of how things progress as we age. And this graph is actually from the womb rather than just from when you're born, and how much time not only do you spend awake, but how much time you spend in each part of the sleep. So each different type of sleep, right, REM sleep and non-REM, changes as we age. So that's what sleep is. What makes us sleep? Why do we sleep? So we have different rhythms in our bodies, just in general. And one that's very important is the circadian rhythm. And circadian really just means 24 hours, right? So circadian rhythm means essentially 1 day rhythm. And all of our bodies roll on a circadian rhythm. When it comes to sleep, there's this interaction between two things: the homeostatic drive and the circadian rhythm. So homeostatic drive is this sleep need, is this pressure for sleep that we tend to have that has a cycle of its own. And that cycle plays well with the circadian rhythm, and that tells us why we sleep. So that is what this chart is really depicting, is that as the day goes on, our feeling and our pressure and our need for sleep tends to increase and moves on a cycle. And then after we have slept, that need decreases. And so that again happens in a 24-hour period. So it's not just, again, like I said, it's not just sleep that moves on that cycle. Our whole body moves on that cycle. So sleep is really a biorhythm. So if you're looking at this, you can see that during the different times of day, there are a lot of different changes that happen, and a lot of them kind of flow into sleep. So when you, we'll start it kind of at the noon, right? So we're looking at noon it's 2:30, it's military time, but around 2:30 is the time when you're best coordinated. Around that time too, within the 2:30 to the 3:30, you have your fastest reaction time. So if you're going to do any of these new dance challenges or anything with your kids or grandkids, that's probably the best time of day to do it. You also have the greatest cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength a little while after that, which is also very helpful there. Once the sun starts to go down, that's when you're kind of at the peak in this cycle of like your highest blood pressure, your highest body temperature. And then as the night starts to wane on, then your body starts to secrete melatonin. And the secretion of melatonin is what tells us that, hey, it's probably time for you to start getting ready to go to sleep. And then about 2 a.m. is when you are generally in the deepest sleep. Around 4:30 in the morning is when you're at the lowest body temperature. And then about 6:45 in the morning, there's the sharpest rise in blood pressure. And then the melatonin secretion stops around 7:30 in the morning. So you see that it's pretty much a cycle of a biological cycle of this kind of need for sleep and how it is presented. And so it's not just, like I said, our body has a lot of different rhythms. So it's not just the circadian rhythm we're talking about. There's also the infradian rhythm, which is less than once a day, once a month or once a season. So these are things like migrations for birds, hibernation for bears, menstrual cycle for human women, something like that. And then ultradian rhythms are more than one time a day. So things like our hormone levels or the stomach contractions that tell us that we're hungry. So with the circadian rhythms, they're actually controlled by a bio clock within the brain. All of our cells have a cell clock, and it's regulated by the hypothalamus, which is what is telling our body to release the melatonin, that we discussed about. But these are the internal cues. There are also external cues that can help with this. Things like the light-dark cycle, stress, exercise, meal times, and illness. These are why these different things can disrupt your sleep cycle. So for example, when you are sick, you tend to sleep more because it tends to increase your pressure or your sleep need. And if you are in places like Alaska, which has these issues with light and dark, with the days that last for way longer than most places where have more sunshine. That switch of that light dark cycle tends to mess with an individual's sleep. So this is just kind of a reiteration of this interplay of that homeostatic drive that we talked about with sleep and the circadian rhythm, right? So at the top you have like this homeostatic sleep drive, right? So at 7 a.m. when you wake up, you're not really all that sleepy, but then the need for sleep increases, right, until you go to sleep, and then it decreases and you wake up and it keeps doing that, right? And then at the same time, you have the circadian arousal drive, which is pulling from the melatonin and the other things that we just discussed. And this is really just a colorful and better way to depict that. But what I really wanted to show here is this dip. So this dip it happens around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is a dip in the circadian rhythm it's actually on a lot of the different graphs, but it happens in everyone. And that's why there tends to be this weird dip in energy midday. It has an evolutionary purpose, but like a lot of things, we don't necessarily need it, but we still have it. So So that is the circadian rhythm of sleep, but sleep tends to change over time as well, right? So we talked about the different number of hours of sleep you get as you move across age, right? But it's a little bit more than just a change in hours. So here's that hypnogram that I showed you before. The top is a young adult, the bottom is an older adult, and to the right is really just a breakdown of the different stages of the sleep. And so what you're seeing is that with the young adult versus the young adult, of course, you still have the same stages, but the cycling through the stages is different. And things like the REM sleep are shorter in the older adult, right? So there's changes in circadian rhythm that are happening as we age. So, and it's not just within sleep. So temperature is one of the strong things that is most strongly controlled, by circadian rhythms. And you can see that in the blue lines here are younger adults, and the red lines, are older adults. So you can see these changes across all of these different circadian rhythms here. So what it really boils down to is that the sleep characteristics change as over the life cycle. So newborns and infants, they're more active in their sleep. Half of their time is spent in REM sleep, and they have several periods of sleep, and they need those naps. And that's, of course, because they're building up their synapses, they're learning. That's their general purpose of life. Toddlers, their sleep begins to resemble the adult patterns, but they still need more sleep. Children experience more deep sleep, and then adolescents have a shift to a later sleep-wake cycle and start to experience their daytime sleepiness. And then when it comes to adults, in order to obtain that sufficient quality sleep, that's when we start to need that regular sleep schedule. And with older adults, they're more likely to have medical problems that will disrupt their sleep and disorders. And so that's what would lead them to sleep less efficiently. So essentially, the sleep becomes more fragmented. So there's not a lot of just sleeping straight through the night. There's less deep sleep. There's more just waking up. There's less sleepiness, though. But the sleep times actually tend to kind of stay the same. So the length of time that you're sleeping doesn't change, but the time that you wake up and the time that you go to bed actually might change. A lot of people find themselves getting up earlier, and because of that, of course, going to bed earlier. But in the absence of any diseases or any disorders, older adults tend to sleep just as well as younger adults. So that's what sleep is. That's why we sleep, as much as we can understand. So what are the functions of sleep? So again, the exact purpose of sleep has not been, fully illuminated, but there are several prominent theories that have been explored and that attempt to identify a purpose for why we sleep. So that includes, of course, the consolidation of memories and the restoration of things for our bodies, bodily repair, energy conservation. So this theory is that the main function of sleep is to reduce your energy demand during part of the day and night. At night when it's less efficient to hunt for food. So that's where it's coming from when we were hunters and gatherers. This is supported by a couple of things. One, this really cute koala in the corner strongly supports this because koalas are awesome sleepers. They sleep about 20 to 25, 20 to 25 20 to 22 hours a day. And that's mostly because their diet consists of eucalyptus leaves, and that's just not enough energy to sustain anything. So they sleep. It's also supported by the fact that there's a decrease in our metabolism as humans, up to about 10% while we're sleeping. There's also the release of hormones that govern the growth and reproduction to keep us moving forward. And so almost everything, sleep has been characterized in many species, from humans, birds, fish, flies, everything. But there are some species that don't sleep. For example, blind fish that live in caves and sighted fish, they swim continuously. And it's generally because there's a reduced amount of input for these animals because of the nocturnal activity, because there's a cave, there's not much to see. And for the blind fish, they can't see. And because they're fish, they tend to be in schools. There's a reduced need for them to use visual information. And they tend to inherit memories and things that they need to survive. And so they don't need to consolidate memories. They don't need to use the brain power that we as humans would need to use, and therefore they don't need to sleep as much. So more on that, when we're talking about memory, there are different phases of memory. So 3 phases of memory. One is encoding, which would be taking things into your memory. Excuse me. So there's this, if you've ever done any kind of testing, there's this time where you learn something and then people wait a while and then they test you again. Then that's the encoding of the information into your memory. And then there's the consolidation of that information. And the consolidation of that information is essentially taking it from your short-term memory banks into your long-term memory banks. And then there's, of course, the retrieval of the things that have been placed into your long-term memory banks. And so the role of sleep here tends to be thought to have to deal with the consolidation of memories from short-term into long-term, and from the process and in processing of information. So processing of learning for rules, pattern separation, understanding the overall gist of things. So this is a lot on a slide, but it's really just kind of showing a bit of a pathway of what we just talked about. So you experience something and it's temporarily stored in your hippocampus, and that's the encoding part of it. And then the process of now is moving it from there into the long-term store, which is in the neocortex. And through sleep, there's this kind of pathway here that happens while you're sleeping to move from the temporary store into that long-term store. But a better way of kind of looking at it is thinking of the actual way that our brain works. In order to do that, we start with the neuron. And so the neurons are basically what make up our brain. And the synapses of the neuron, the firing of the neuron, is what makes our brain move. This is how we learn things. This is how new information is processed. And so this is essentially what a neuron looks like. It has the cell body, it has a nucleus, and then the soma is the cell body. It has the nucleus, and then you have the dendrites, the axon, and I'm sorry, I'm pointing at you. You have the dendrites, you have the axon in the middle, and then you have the axon terminal, and then you really just have neurons back to back. And so this is one neuron, then there'd be another neuron here with its dendrites up against the axon terminal of the previous one. And so essentially the neurons are speaking to one another. And so I showed you that to really kind of bring this slide into play, to help us understand a little bit more. So we have this young lady here, and essentially what she's doing is she's just going about her day, right? She's speaking with her friends, and she's living her life. She's learning new things, right? And so the red brain at the top is really all of her neurons firing during the day. And that is each of the different neurons talking to one another, passing the information of all of the things that she's learned. And essentially the thought is, as we learn, we create more and more connections. So we get more and more neurons. And essentially, if this continues without any interference in any way, it's just going to just keep going and getting larger and larger. But there's no possible way for that to be done because our brains are contained within our head and within our skull. There's a limited amount of things that can be done. And so what happens when we're sleeping with these neurons and the axons is that our brains do the culling and the pruning, and it makes sure we keep the things we need, and don't keep the things that are unnecessary. And so that's part of the consolidation. That's part of the things that happen while we're sleeping. And so this is again, this is the same kind of wave that we've been looking at before with the sleep. But this is also now with showing how it works within our neurons and and our synapses. So we have this high demand when we're awake, and there's just a lot of firing. And so when we're asleep, there is less demand, and there's this downscaling of the synapses and renormalizing for us to be able to do it again the next day. So just, excuse me. And so just kind of really to summarize is that with sleep and memory, memories tend to be moved from temporary to long-term storage while we sleep. It's more efficient when there's a sensory and motor disconnection. And then so sleep is the prize of plasticity, right? So our brains can continue to grow and learn because when we sleep, we make sure that that we keep the most important connections during that downscaling process. So just a few kind of, I guess, examples of that. So starting with declarative memory. So with this, there's a study done with sleep fragmentation. And the way that they created sleep fragmentation was through intermittent sounds triggered by an individual falling into slow wave sleep. So that's one of the deeper sleeps. And when they did that, it reduced these individuals' performance on viewed images. So basically, they showed people a bunch of images, let them sleep, but every time they were falling into this slow wave sleep, they would wake them up with sounds. And it wasn't necessarily a full wake. It was more micro wakes. It was just a wake that would disrupt that rhythm. And as you can kind of see here, like with the normal sleepers, they were able to just kind of remember more of the images when their sleep was not disrupted. Similarly, if you create this slow wave activity with different, they did it with transcranial electrical stimulation, which is essentially electricity up against the skull, but it's, it sounds way more painful than it is. It's not painful at all. And it actually would improve the individual's declarative memory for different word pairs. So this is really showing that the learning and declarative memory is tied very closely to sleep. Emotional memory has a bit of a different connection. So sleep depotentiates the activity within the amygdala. So the amygdala is essentially the seat of emotion in the brain. My amygdala is the reason why I'm very, very afraid of spiders, right? So this is what governs almost all of your emotions. And this is what is kind of tamped down during sleep. So this is why when we are children and we're unruly and we're just cranky, our moms are like, you need to go to bed, right? Because once you do, you go to sleep, you calm down, and you wake up in the morning and everything is much, much better. That is because of the relationship with sleep and amygdala activity. Another example of that, which this one is I really like. So what these researchers did was they gathered a group of people and had them sing karaoke. The caveat was that they had to wear headphones that muffled the sound. So they could not hear themselves very well, or really couldn't hear themselves at all. And so what ended up happening is, of course, if you can't hear yourself when you're trying to sing along to something, you don't sing very well. So it impeded any kind of pitch correction that they could do. And so it made sure that a lot of their singing was out of tune. And what they did was they played those recordings back of the bad karaoke singing for these people. And the amygdala response to that is what they were really kind of looking at. So in reality, what you're thinking of is this shame or this fear that you feel when you hear your own voice back to you sounding terrible, right? That is what shows up in your amygdala. And what they found was that there was a decrease in the response to that terrible, terrible singing when you had more REM sleep. So essentially, when you have more REM sleep, you're not as affected by those kind of negative emotions. Another thing that happens during sleep is this metabolite, this idea of metabolite clearance. There's a lot going on here, but essentially what we want to think about is that there are a lot of different proteins, metabolites, things that are supposed to be in our brain and that happen in our brain, but they don't need to stay there. And so what we've found is that there is a system within the brain that clears that out. And it does that clearance essentially while we're sleeping. So this photo here, or what you're seeing here, is of a mouse brain. And they injected the mouse with, I want to say it was amyloid beta, which is the proteins that happen in our brain naturally, but tend to aggregate and tend to fold over. And then that is what leads to Alzheimer's disease. And essentially the mouse that was allowed to sleep, and while they're sleeping, which is the one at the top in the green, right? Because green is the good and go color. These things were beginning to be cleared out while they slept. But in the mouse that was awake, there's this, the metabolites are still there. There is no real clearance happening. So it's showing that the clearance happens while we're asleep. So it's another function of sleep that's really helpful. So mentioned Alzheimer's disease, wanted to really kind of get a better idea of that instead of just kind of glossing over it, right? So with Alzheimer's disease, there are two things that happen, amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. So amyloid plaques are, like I said, the amyloid proteins that are misfolded and land in the brain. And so those are outside of the cell. And then the neurofibrillary tangles happen within the cell. And those are really triggering of brain death. So these are the things that show, neuronal death, excuse me. And these are the things that show up when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. And this Amyloid beta, which is again naturally occurring, also has this diurnal rhythm, or this, it flows on the circadian clock as well. And this is what these two things show, is that it kind of moves on this clock, and you can kind of see the wave here as well. And this is one of the things that gets cleared out in the brain while we sleep. And neuronal activity actually increases during the production of amyloid beta. So we produce it while we're awake. There's a lot of production there, but it gets cleared out while we're asleep. Right? And then that this is really what's depicting that. So on the left here, we have the default mode network, which is the areas of our brain that are pretty much always active. They're active when we're at rest. And then on the right, we have amyloid deposition. And you can see that they're kind of in the same areas. And it's because when we're at rest, the amyloid beta deposits are still kind of, they're happening in those active areas. So again, this is the mysteries of sleep that we mentioned before when I had the picture with the koala, right? But then if you think about it, when we bring in Alzheimer's disease, right, the issues that happen with Alzheimer's disease, the difficulty with the processing of memory, the difficulty with the clearance of metabolic byproducts, issues with brain plasticity and the regulation of the immune system, emotion regulation, all of these things, all of these things are happening within Alzheimer's disease. So there is a link there with sleep and Alzheimer's disease that we're really trying to untangle, for lack of a better word, with research currently. But it's another reason why we speak on sleep and brain health, because if you're improving your sleep, then you are decreasing your risk of developing lots and lots of disorders, which of course now includes Alzheimer's disease. Let me skip those slides. So of course, we're still in the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we have this slide of helpful tips on like how to maintain sleep during COVID-19, which is very difficult. But maintaining a regular schedule is very, very helpful. Not napping excessively is very helpful. We talked about the buildup of the sleep need, and then it going down when you sleep, and kind of making this cycle. But the cycle is a biological cycle. So the naps, if they're excessive, will disrupt that cycle rather than being helpful to that cycle. Getting some exercise is very helpful, just in general, for outlooks on life, but it is also helpful for your sleep and your brain health. Just don't do it right before bed. Structure your news intake. I have structured mine down to almost none, but I have designated people to tell me the important things. And then make sure you limit blue light before bedtime. It disrupts your sleep pattern. So blue light comes from computer screens, televisions, cell phones, things like that. So try not to look directly into those things right before bed. And then avoid drinking alcohol. And that doesn't mean at all, I'm not judging your life. You can drink alcohol if you want, but excessive alcohol and alcohol at certain hours will disrupt your sleep as well. So thank you. That is all for the presentation. And I do believe we have time for some questions.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. That was fabulous. I learned a lot and learned that I also need a lot more sleep. Does anybody have any questions? You can go on ahead and raise your hand or type the questions in the chat box below. Okay, someone's from the Central Synagogue. Go ahead.
Yes, my husband he goes to bed early because our aides leave at 8:30. So he's asleep. He usually falls asleep quickly. But anywhere between 1 and 3, he he has conversations and he laughs and he talks. And at the same time, I have a continent problem. So I'm up every hour or so. So the later I stay up, the less I have to go to the bathroom. But when I get to bed at say 11:30, 12 o'clock, within an hour, he's chatting away. So I don't get proper sleep. I don't know how to deal with this.
That's a good point. So honestly, dealing with bed partners is always going to be difficult, right? Because it's two people trying to regulate their sleep in the same space. So just keeping that in mind, that's always going to be difficult. That's not a unique thing. So this is not, an issue that's happening only to you. So definitely want to let you know that. Um, has have you spoken with his doctor? Has he spoken with his doctor about checking into his sleep in general? Because it sometimes talking in your sleep is just talking in your sleep, but sometimes it may be indicative of a problem with sleeping. So you might just want to get that part checked out and invested.
I have done that. He has both sleep apnea and he has breathing problems. So he's on a machine, which he removes.
Ah, okay. So he's on the, he has a
He
sleep.
has invisible friends that he talks to and they answer back.
Mhm.
He laughs.
Yeah. So a lot of times, the CPAP and the removal of the CPAP and the things like that, we get the different kind of the talking in your sleep and the kind of interacting with the those things when our sleep is disrupted. And so a lot of times it's showing that there is a sleep problem that needs to be addressed. So we see that you've already seen that there is a sleep problem that needs to be addressed. Maybe working with figuring out how to keep him on the machine longer, and seeing if that balances it out, because it seems like that is really what it is. It's he's having this disruption in his sleep and it's bringing him up a little bit in his wakefulness, and so he it tends to kind of speak and laugh during his sleep. And then that's really the most we can really do is kind of try to address the underlying issue here, because you're absolutely right with having to get up to go to the restroom. That's going to happen. Unfortunately, you're going to continue to wake. And I think with the combining of the sleep apnea and then you coming to bed, I think that is bringing his wakefulness up a little bit of a level, and that's where the talking is coming into play.
Great, thank you, Dr. Turner. So this we might need a little more research for this one, but do salmon who have to swim back to their birthplaces have more memory than other fishes?
I am not a fish expert. Okay, so let's start there. But I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that they have different memories. So essentially, there are ancestral memories, I guess is one way I want to put it, but memories that are actually genetically passed on, right? And that happens in different animals, and that's what's happening a lot of times with the salmon. So it's not necessarily that they have, better memories, they have different memories because they have evolved to swim back to their homes, and this being a part of what they do as a species. So it's just different than the other fish.
Thank you. What are the effects of not having a regular sleep cycle?
I need more information on what you mean by regular sleep cycle. Do you mean like regular sleep time of going to bed and waking up, or okay, I want to answer the question correctly.
Okay, let's see. Go ahead, John.
Yes, hi. My question is, if you sleep, if your schedule is not regular, like, suppose you go to sleep one day at 1 a.m., then 2 a.m., then midnight. So what effect does that have of not having a set schedule?
Okay, yes. So it can throw off your circadian rhythm. So when we talked about the circadian rhythm and the secretion of melatonin, that is governed by an internal clock, and we can change and reset that clock by internal and external cues. So generally, there is a space of time for you. So if you go to bed between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. every night, and as long as you're getting the 7 to 9 hours of sleep, then it shouldn't really have an effect, because you're getting the right amount of sleep and you have a kind of a set time. It's just not like I go to bed at 11:30, right? That's not necessarily the need. The need is to have the correct amount of hours and the correct kind of like the ability for it to be a cycle, if that makes sense. But if you're going to bed, say at 11:30 on Tuesdays and 3 a.m. on Wednesdays, and 2-ish on Thursdays, right? And it's around like that, and the hours are just disrupted like that, it will disrupt your cycle, which can lead to things like insomnia and having difficulty falling asleep, because your body doesn't necessarily know when you plan on going to bed, right? So you get into the bed and you're like, all right, it's bedtime, let's go. And your body's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that, because yesterday you told me that we were staying up till 3 a.m. and now it's 11:30, and I don't think that's a good idea, right? So that cycle will throw off. So you want to try to keep this a 1 or 2 hour frame of when you go to bed and when you get up, and to keep your cycle together. Think of it in the same way you think of like a jet lag thing. If you fly across the country, everything is just out of whack because the times that your body is used to is completely different. Your cycle is not regulated, your body does not have the ability to get used to it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Anne? My name is Anne. Can you hear me?
Go
Yes.
ahead, Miss London.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. I sometimes start getting tired like 8-ish or so at night, just
Mhm.
like kind of like my eyes are a little, sleepy. So I go and I take some medication, including a sleeping pill. And about 8:30, I'll go lay down, and it could be 10:30, and I'm still awake.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know why? I get to bed and I think, instead of I'm tired, but I start thinking, and it's like 2 hours that go by before I look at the clock. It's already like 10 o'clock and I've been in bed 2 hours.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different things that can play into that. And you're saying you're taking medication. It could be a medication interplay as well.
But it's a sleeping pill.
Yes, but if you're taking other medications,
Yes.
there could be an interplay with the sleeping pill and the other medications. So
Uh-huh.
you check into that they're not canceling each other out, so to speak.
Oh.
And if they're canceling each other out and you are relying on the sleeping pill, your body isn't really thinking that I should be doing these things to prepare for bed, because you have in your mind, oh, I've taken the sleeping pill, it should be fine, if that makes sense, right?
And do you think it's I should try staying up later? Does that help?
Honestly, it's really a personal internal thing. That's the whole thing. I don't know, like the whole night owl versus what do they call the morning people? I don't know, I forget, because I'm definitely a night owl, as you can see. But but the morningness or eveningness is what that you tend to, right? Those are personal things that are based on your own circadian rhythm, right? So if you are feeling sleepy around, 8:30ish, then it could very well be that that is the time in which your body says it's time to go to bed, right? That could
Okay.
be a cycle. So I would honestly check with if you're taking sleeping pills, then you probably have been prescribed them, and especially if you're taking other medications, I would
Yeah,
check.
I lay down and I just think. I don't sleep, I think.
Yeah, I would check in with your doctor, even if it is just to check in on the different medications that you're taking and how they
Okay.
not interact with one another.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. What is the negative effect or effects of sleep apnea?
All of the negative effects. No, I'm kidding. Sleep apnea is related to several different health conditions, as well as being linked to impairments in cognition. So those with sleep apnea have higher rates of hypertension. They have higher rates of actually developing Alzheimer's disease. They have a higher possibility of having a stroke. They have impairments in memory, have impairments in executive functioning, which is our higher level of thinking, like the problem solving, things like that, are related to sleep apnea. And it's related to sleep apnea because within sleep apnea, essentially you either reduce the amount of oxygen you take in, or you completely stop breathing for a short amount of time while you're sleeping. And that deprives your brain of oxygen for however long. We call it hypoxia or a hypoxic event. And those events tend to lead to these negative consequences. The good thing about it is that all of the negative consequences of sleep apnea are able to be reversed with treatment. So if you have or suspect that you have sleep apnea, you definitely should check in with your doctor. Generally, a primary your primary care physician can, if they are not able, they can refer you to a sleep specialist so that you can be tested and diagnosed for sleep apnea, and that you can get the treatment that works best for you.
Thank you. How long before bedtime should I stop watching TV or using my phone? Is 1 hour enough?
1 hour is definitely enough. What I suggest, well, I'm a little old school, so when I was kind of coming up through the ranks, one of the things that they really, really like dug down on was sleep hygiene. There's a little bit less of an emphasis on it now, but sleep hygiene is just doing all of these things to make sure that your body is ready for sleep, and that sleep is the only thing that you're focused on. So the biggest one for me is not having a television in your bedroom, and really only using your bedroom for sleeping and being intimate, and stopping using screens an hour before bed. Do not consume caffeine. I generally say 5 hours is the minimum amount of time before bed, but it's usually about, this is stop caffeine maybe 4 p.m. I think is the latest generally. And alcoholic beverages, I think they said 7 p.m. was when I was coming in, but I would say maybe at like 3 hours. So an hour, you want to stop the screens. 3 hours, you want to stop the alcohol. 5 to 6 hours, you want to stop the caffeine.
Thank you. Okay, so we have time. It's 12:59. We have time for one more question. John, I see that your hand has been raised, so go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, just to follow up to my last question, if you don't have a regular sleep schedule, what effect, if any, will that have if you have a mood disorder, specifically bipolar disorder?
It will definitely exacerbate your mood disorder. It will make things, it will definitely make things worse. But if you are on medication for the mood disorder, like if you are on, I don't know if you are taking, for example, lithium for bipolar, then that is one way that it is kind of regulated. But another problem is with bipolar disorder, as well as with depression, the changes in sleep and problems with sleep are a part of the disorder. So if you do have bipolar disorder and you do not have a regular sleep schedule, you really should look into working with a doctor to figure out how to create a schedule in the way that works best for you, even if that schedule is, because one of the things that people really tend to harp on is they need to go to bed early. They need to go to bed at 11 o'clock. They need to go to bed at 10 o'clock. You need to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. What time you go to bed is up to you, right? But you need to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and you need to do so on a regular cycle. So if you have a mood disorder, it's very important that you work with your therapist and your doctor to find a cycle that would work best for you and a time that will work best for you, so that you don't make things worse for yourself.
Thank you.